Have you guys decided yet or made a determination about whether what Israel hit in Damascus was a diplomatic facility or not?
We have not. We have not.
So how long is this going to take?
I can't answer that question. We're continuing to look into it. I don't have a timetable, but it's
What
something
more
that
do you need to?
we need to gather enough
What
information.
they are saying is, what they are witnessing is horrific scenes. Yesterday, a mass grave been discovered in the outskirts of a Shifa hospital that contains so many unknown bodies. Did you see these reports, and do you have any comment on it?
Are your concerns still as high as they may have been over the weekend for escalation?
They continue to be high. It's always tough to assign an exact percentage or say if they've gone up or gone down, partially because we have been at risk of escalation of this conflict really since October 7th, and it's been something that we have been working to avoid and something that we have been working to contain. And there have been various periods where the risk of escalation has gone up. Obviously, over the weekend, we saw the risk of escalation increase dramatically. And of course, the Iranians did escalate the conflict. This was clearly an escalatory act, the launching of 300 missiles and drones from Iranian soil directly targeted at the state of Israel. And so what we're going to continue to do is try to de-escalate the conflict. As long as the war in Gaza continues, we're not going to be back at the place we were before October 7th. It is an ongoing process of trying to keep tensions in the region, to reduce tensions in the region and try to maintain as much calm as possible, knowing that there is an ongoing conflict that obviously exacerbates tensions in Israel and around the region.
Matt, I know you said they didn't give you any sense of what their plans are, but did they give you any timeline of when they might respond, hours, days?
I'm just not going to speak to those private conversations. And as I said, those are really decisions for the Israeli government and questions best posed to the Israeli government.
Has there been any exchange of messages between the U.S. and Iran in the wake of this weekend's?
There has not been, and I've seen some false reporting about messages exchanged between the United States and Iran, reports claiming that we have delivered messages to them. There have not been such messages delivered. It's been days since we've communicated, since we've sent messages to the government of Iran. And I say that as a reminder of something we've said before. Oftentimes, the Iranian government has misled the world about either messages they've passed to us or messages that we have passed to them, and some of those reports over the past few days have been false.
And do you have any plans to engage with the Iranian foreign minister when he's in New York?
I do not anticipate any such engagements.
Can you confirm the U.S. has granted him a visa for his visit to the UN?
So a few things about that. Number one, visa records are confidential as a matter of law. They're not something I can speak to from this podium. Number two, we do take our obligation as the host nation of the United Nations quite seriously, and that includes allowing diplomats from other countries, even countries with whom we have significant disagreements, to attend UN meetings and UN functions. But number three, we do have the ability to restrict, and in fact severely restrict, the movements of certain diplomats while they are in New York for legitimate UN meetings. So should the foreign minister of Iran attend this meeting at the United Nations, I would not expect to see him at very many locations outside the United Nations.
But there were already restrictions, so this is a further restriction?
Again, I'm not going to speak to that in detail, other than to say we do have the ability to impose very severe restrictions on the movements of certain diplomats, and I would not expect to see him very many places outside the United Nations.
Because one of the first things you guys did, like in February, just after you came into office, was to remove the restrictions that were put on Iranian diplomats in New York. So have you restored those?
So as I stand here today,
And those restrictions, if I'm correct, and I think I am, it precluded them from going anywhere outside of the UN building, the Iranian mission, and like a 5-block radius of the east side.
So as I stand here today, a day before this scheduled meeting, when he is not here, the Iranian foreign minister is not here in New York, I'm not able to speak to that question or answer it in detail. But I will just say, should he attend, you can expect very severe restrictions on his movements inside New York.
The Office of Foreign Missions puts out, it did when the Trump administration did this, it was public. It came out. So
I would just say,
and then you guys rescinded them very deliberately.
And I would say stay tuned, but I would not expect to see him, for example, snapping selfies on top of the Empire State Building should he travel to New York to attend this meeting.
Well, how about snapping selfies on the East River at the UN building?
Obviously, that goes back to the thing I said at the beginning, which is
So
we do take
anything until he actually shows
we do
up.
take our obligation as the host of the United Nations seriously, but we have the ability to impose restrictions for people to travel outside of attending United Nations meetings and say hotels and airports and such things. The ability to travel to and from United Nations meetings.
Israel.
Go ahead.
Just to follow up on, you mentioned it's been days since you've sent any messages. So are you talking about, messages to the government of Iran? You're talking about the indirect messages that are sent through other countries, right?
Correct.
And when you say days, you mean this is before the attacks on the weekend, the last time that happened?
I am not going to get into the detail. I'm going to try to go back to what has been our usual posture. As you recall, usually what we have done is not publicly discuss those messages. There have been a few times in the past week where we have communicated about these messages because we've seen the Iranian government mislead the world about what we have said or what they have said to us. So I wanted to make public the fact that we have not sent a message in the last few days, because I have seen this reporting about messages that we supposedly sent to them in the past few days that is completely false and is not true. But I'm going to get back to our usual posture of keeping those communications private.
But before that begins, are there any messages you've received since the attacks?
I don't have any further messages to read out.
And is there a U.S. assessment on whether, if in the event of an Israeli response, if as expected the Israelis, or as might be expected, the Israelis strike in Iran itself, does the U.S. have an assessment of how Iran would react to that, and is that part of these discussions that the Secretary?
I think that gets me into a double hypothetical, and I'm going to decline even to engage with the first part of that hypothetical question, let alone the second. I'll leave it at that.
Yep.
Thank you. The IDF is.
What's that?
The infamous double hypothetical.
I'll keep it to one next time.
Fair enough.
The IDF's confirmed that they've eliminated a senior Hezbollah commander who was part of their coastal operations. Should we read that as in any way a retaliation or the beginning of something to do with Iran? And then I have another question on Gaza.
So I'm reluctant to tell you how to read it or to try and provide any guidance about how to read it. I would note, of course, that Israel has been engaged in conflict and exchange of fire with Hezbollah back, well, obviously before October 7th, but in a significant way since October 7th. That in itself is not an unusual activity to have occurred.
Thank you. And do you have any updates since yesterday on conversations with the Israelis about Rafah, their Rafah operation? Anything from them about a humanitarian plan on Rafah? And do you also have an update on the number of American citizens who may still be in Gaza who want to leave Gaza, including their non-American family members?
So with respect to the second question, that's a good one. It's been some time since I've checked. I will take that back and get you an answer. I'm not sure if we have an assessment. For a while we were working to facilitate the departure of American citizens and family members, and we still are. But the demand that we have seen from American citizens and their family members has declined dramatically over time, as you would expect, right? A lot of people leave at the outset of the conflict, and then others make decisions to stay for various reasons. So the demand has gone down significantly over time. But I'll check and see if we have an assessment of the number remaining. And then in terms of a Rafah operation, I don't have any. We have not yet had the follow-on meeting to talk in detail about the government of Israel's plans, and we have still not been briefed in detail on their plans, either for a humanitarian evacuation or humanitarian considerations, or on the military side.
Thank you.
Let me go here. I'll come to you. I'll come to you next, Jan. Go ahead.
Matt, I want to go to about the Shifa hospital. Today, a UN team entered, and what they are witnessing is horrific scenes. Yesterday, a mass grave been discovered in the outskirts of a Shifa hospital that contains so many unknown bodies. Did you see these reports, and do you have any comment on it?
I've seen the report. I don't have any independent assessment to offer at this time. I'd want to look into it in detail before I can offer any kind of reaction.
But did you reach out to the Israelis? Are you opening an investigation on that? It's a mass grave.
So again, we don't have American personnel in Israel who can open such an investigation or conduct any kind of inquiry. We don't have people on the ground who can look into it, what happened. These are the types of things we raise with the Israeli government regularly. With respect to this specific one, I've just seen the report, so before I offer any kind of detailed comment on it, I want to be able to look into it and confer with my colleagues about what any follow-up steps might be.
My last question will be, any updates on how many trucks are entering Gaza now daily? Are they still at the 400 level?
We have seen a significant increase in the number of trucks. They've gotten up to 400. Some days they've dipped back below. For example, late last week there were a few days during Eid when it was hard to find truck drivers, so the level of deliveries dipped. We have seen, however, a steady increase in the number of trucks that are going into Gaza. I would say it is not just the number of trucks, however, that we've focused on. It's also where the trucks are going, ensuring that they get into northern Gaza. As you heard me say yesterday, on Sunday, 65 trucks had gone into northern Gaza, and there were more planned for yesterday. I believe those trucks did move into northern Gaza. It's been ensuring that Ashdod port is open. It now is open for humanitarian deliveries. It's ensuring that bakeries, including bakeries in northern Gaza, can reopen. And in the past 24 hours, we have seen bakeries reopen, which is important for getting food directly to the Palestinian people. And so with all of these mechanisms, we have been working to increase their capacity and make sure they are sustained. And we have seen improvement, not yet to the level where it needs to be, and certainly once it gets to that level, we need to see it sustained over time, and that's how we're going to judge things. But we have seen some steady improvement over the past 10 days or so.
Follow-up?
Yeah, go ahead. I said I'd come to Jani next, but go ahead. What's a follow-up, and then I'll come to you, Jani.
On trucks going into Gaza, are these numbers based on Israeli figures? This is my first question. And secondly, UNRWA released a report today saying that there has been no significant change in the volume of humanitarian supplies entering Gaza or improved access to the north. Since the beginning of April, they said an average of 881 aid trucks have crossed into Gaza per day. What is your assessment on this? It seems that, maybe Israel has taken some steps in this regard, but it seems it's not enough. Do you agree? And also, we'll follow up on that.
Sure. So first of all, with respect to this dispute over trucks, part of it is counting different things, and not just counting a different way, but there are some deliveries that happen that are commercial deliveries that the UN doesn't count because they're not part of the relief efforts that the UN monitors. So two things happen. Number one, there are trucks that come in through Rafah and through Kerem Shalom that then are offloaded at Rafah and Kerem Shalom and loaded onto UN trucks, and UN uses different size trucks, so the UN counts their trucks, not the number of trucks that are coming in. It is a different way to actually measure the number of trucks. However, even that said, the UN number itself doesn't capture the entire daily volume because there are commercial trucks that are coming in some cases coming in directly through the north, through Erez, or are coming in through the 96 gate crossing that they opened, or are coming in through the south and are driving up internal roads. And those aren't counted, to my understanding, in the UN numbers because they're not being delivered through any of the UN agencies, through UNRWA or through the World Food Program or others. So the UN number does not count the total amount of delivery that goes in. That said, I would agree with the overall assessment that we are not yet at the level we need to be. Very much agree with that. But we have seen steady progress, and there are other things that are coming online. For example, this thing you've heard me talk about before, where there are trucks now that are making deliveries directly from Jordan, coming through Israel and then delivering directly into Gaza. That is happening. It's going to be increased as Israel makes certain improvements to traffic and clearing rubble and other debris that's blocking the ability to sustain further traffic through some of these crossings that have recently opened. So we've gone up. We see the pathway to going up more. We want to ensure that that's what actually happens, and that's what we're working every day to do. So that's a long-winded answer, I know, but it's a complicated question.
Thank you. I appreciate. Some reports say that quantity changed, increased, quantity of trucks changed, increased, but trucks are not fully loaded. Is this something that you also observe and or raise with Israelis?
I'm sure it is the case that some trucks are not fully loaded. I have a hard time kind of litigating this exact dispute where I'm looking at every truck that goes in. But I will say our humanitarian experts who are on the ground have seen an increased volume, not just of trucks, but of humanitarian assistance going in. We have seen that over the past 10 days. But that said, it's not enough. And it needs to continue, and it needs to be sustained. And that is absolutely what we are working on every day. Janet, go ahead.
Thank you. 2 questions on Israel and Iran. It was reported that the Director General of IAEA said there were concerns that Israel would attack Iranian nuclear facilities. What is your opinion on this possibility?
Again, I'm not going to engage with hypotheticals at all, other than to say that we want to continue to avoid further escalation in the region.
On Iraq,
Just before we leave this, have you guys decided yet or made a determination about whether what Israel hit in Damascus was a diplomatic facility or not?
We have not. We have not.
So how long is this going to take?
I can't answer that question. We're continuing to look into it. I don't have a timetable, but it's something that
What more do you need to?
we need to gather enough information that will allow us to make an actual determination.
You have no one on the ground in Syria.
We
at
have
least
arranged,
overtly.
as I said to you when the last time you engaged with me on this question, we have a range of abilities, a range of ways to gather information. They're partner countries of ours who are on the ground. We have intelligence capabilities, obviously, and we're continuing to gather information, but we've not yet been able to make a determination.
I get it, but you were pretty quick into condemning the invasion of the Mexican embassy in Ecuador.
That was a very clear, well-established embassy.
And this is not very clear where they blew up.
This is something that is taking a little bit more time.
No one
to
died in
determine.
that incident.
That's not the question. The question was, was it an embassy or a consulate or not? And it was very clear.
How
it was
hard
very
is it to
clear
figure that out?
in the case of the Mexican. It's something that we're gathering
It's
information
been
on,
like 2 weeks.
and we continue
More.
to gather information. We don't have a determination yet.